Your container plant is wilting. Your instinct says water it. But if the problem is drainage, not drought, adding more water could kill it faster. Container plant problems are diagnosis problems. The symptom tells you something, but not always what you think it is telling you. Stacey Murphy walks through every common container problem: yellowing, wilting, salt buildup, stunted growth, and more, and explains exactly what each one actually means.
True. If you've ever had houseplants that are indoor plants that don't need a lot of water, sometimes you'll see that when you overwater a plant that doesn't want a lot of water, it will wilt, and so your instinct is to water it more, and you're actually killing it. So you want to make sure that your plants aren't really moist. So check that potting mix and make sure that it's draining properly. And also cut back a little bit on water if they aren't draining properly, because they're holding enough water and they don't need as much water. The other thing that can, of course, cause that poor color is low fertility. So I found with my eggplant, so remember I said that the one plant I wish I would have fertilized this season was the eggplant. So it was producing fruit, but its lower leaves, every once in a while, I would find its lower rung of leaves would start to yellow. And so I believe that I probably could have fertilized those plants a little bit more, and I would have gotten a little bit more yield and probably wouldn't have had those yellow leaves. And if you get a couple yellow leaves, not the end of the world. I would just take them off the plant so that the plant isn't focused energy on those leaves, and just get them out of the way. And there's a difference between yellow leaves and speckled leaves, right? We've seen with diseased plants, they typically are like yellow with brown spots or yellow with black spots. So that is not what I'm talking about. That is a diseased leaf. I'm talking about a leaf that just turns completely yellow, all of it yellow. That could mean low fertility. All right, and then other container issues, plants will wilt, and this is, again, what I was saying. They'll wilt, and you'll think that it's because they have insufficient water, but really what's going on is they don't have enough drainage.
This Q&A was recorded at a past Grow Your Own Vegetables event, where Stacey Murphy explains the self-watering systems that let your containers water themselves, and the critical potting mix mistake most container gardeners make. For more information, free resources, and gentle guidance, you can find us at growyourownvegetables.org. And to grow alongside other gardeners just like you, join our free community at gyov.org.
And then some of the common container issues that people have are, so this is something I got from a cooperative extension agency. I just love cooperative extensions. They have so much useful information on their website, and I was making this chart and realized that somebody had probably already made it. So I believe this one comes from Maine Cooperative Extension. And so these are all things that people experience, and I've seen some of this in effect as well. So
Screenshot this. Before you do anything to a struggling container plant, identify which of these 5 problems you are looking at. The wrong action makes every one of them worse.
As well. So if you have tall and spindly plants that are unproductive, one of the things that we know about tall spindly plants from our propagation is that they might not be getting enough light. And so that's the first thing to be thinking of. So making sure that if you're growing in containers, oftentimes we're growing in containers because we're in small spaces that generally don't have as much light. So that's something to be aware of. So if you are spindly, maybe try a different area. Try to go outside and do your sun assessment. Take photos at, 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m., 6 p.m. to find out what's going on. And you might have to do that throughout the season, because spring might be way different than fall, might be a lot different than peak summer. So if you find a lot of spindly plants, that's very likely that there's insufficient light. And the other thing is that, and this is something I mentioned with that pallet container, and I have a sense from looking at that pallet that they are overfeeding that pallet because it doesn't look healthy. And so you can be giving your plants too much nitrogen, and basically they will grow a lot of greenery really fast. And what that does a lot of times is produce very spindly plants. And so you want to make sure that you're not fertilizing that often. So like I said earlier, I generally don't do a whole lot of fertilizing with my container gardens because of the potting mix I use. I've seen people who use completely sterile potting mixes and then basically fertilize every 2 weeks, which is pretty close to what people do when they're doing seeding and propagation of trays. So you start to notice some patterns here of what plants like, right? So those are some recommendations, and not a whole lot. You're spritzing. You're not dumping when you're fertilizing. All right, and then so another very common container issue is that the plants start to yellow from the bottom, and in general have some poor color. They lack vigor, so they're not growing very consistently. So sometimes it seems strange to say that like when it's yellowing, what it sounds like it's doing is that it's dying, right? And so you think, oh, I should water more. But a lot of times overwatering can make a plant look like it needs water. And this is one of those cases where if you have a lot of yellowing, it's possible you may be overwatering. So make sure you have that drainage. And this is true. If you've ever had house plants that are indoor plants that don't need a lot of water, sometimes you'll see that when you overwater a plant that doesn't want a lot of water, it will wilt, and so your instinct is to water it more, and you're actually killing it. So you want to make sure that your plants aren't really moist. So check that potting mix and make sure that it's draining properly. And also cut back a little bit on water if they aren't draining properly because they're holding enough water and they don't need as much water. The other thing that can, of course, cause that poor color is low fertility. So I found with my eggplant, so remember I said that the one plant I wish I would have fertilized this season was the eggplant. So it was producing fruit, but its lower leaves, every once in a while, I would find its lower rung of leaves would start to yellow. And so I believe that I probably could have fertilized those plants a little bit more, and I would have gotten a little bit more yield and probably wouldn't have had those yellow leaves. And if you get a couple yellow leaves, not the end of the world. I would just take them off the plant so that the plant isn't focused energy on those leaves, and just get them out of the way. And there's a difference between yellow leaves and speckled leaves, right? We've seen with diseased plants, they typically are like yellow with brown spots or yellow with black spots. So that is not what I'm talking about. That is a diseased leaf. I'm talking about a leaf that just turns completely yellow, all of it yellow. That could mean low fertility. All right, and then other container issues, plants will wilt, and this is again what I was saying, they'll wilt, and you'll think that it's because they have insufficient water, but really what's going on is they don't have enough drainage. So you can do a couple things. You can increase the organic matter a little bit, and you can add a little bit of compost to containers. That's okay. You just don't want to add a whole lot. Vermicompost is one of those things that works really well on containers, and you just want to make sure that vermicompost doesn't touch the leaves of the plants because it can burn the plants. Or you can increase the holes for drainage if you think it's a drainage issue. So
this is the single most dangerous misdiagnosis in container gardening. The plant looks like it needs water. It actually needs less. Check the potting mix 6 inches down before watering a wilting plant.
Drainage issue. So remember from our soil discussion, when you're adding organic matter into a mix, what you're doing is you're increasing the water holding capacity of that mix. And so what you're doing here is you're making sure that you're keeping the plants properly hydrated. All right, and then I have never seen this before in my areas, which makes a lot of sense. But if you see like burning around the edges of the leaf, that could be a sign that you have too many salts. And what do we know about too many salts? Well, what that typically means is it's over-fertilized. And so what you're hoping to do is to basically rid that container of some of those salts. And what you can do is basically water it really heavily and let it keep draining out. And what's going to happen is every time you water, those nutrients water out as well. So here you'll start to see that your goal with containers is to not have water coming out the bottom, because every time water flows out the bottom of your container, you're leaching your minerals or your nutrients if you are fertilizing. And so you're trying to efficiently water these containers without losing that water, because that's where all the minerals are. But if you end up with too many salts, too many minerals, then you do want to figure out a way to leach those through. So hopefully that makes sense. And this is cool because it's actually reinforcing all that we know about our soils as well. All right, and then I've seen that plants stunted in growth, and they might be a sickly purplish color. And so this happens a lot in the greenhouses when people are growing baby plants. And so you can get, oftentimes, in order to increase phosphate levels, a lot of times what we do is we put in fish emulsion, and that is a really great fertilizer for that. And then sometimes they're just stunted because they're downright cold. So, you might relocate your container if it's springtime, and you can find a spot that's even warmer, or especially if it's got morning sun, I would pick morning sun over afternoon sun anytime to get those plants to heat up more quickly for the spring. I might choose differently in the summertime. I might try to find something that doesn't necessarily have peak sun in the morning, because I might not want them to get that hot. And then you'll know if it's insects. You'll see holes in the leaves. So we've already talked about pests and diseases. And then, again, leaves with spots, dried areas, powdery or rusty areas, those are all diseases. And so those are all things that go to the pest and disease management areas of your knowledge and start working through those topics. And so those are some of the common issues that people face when they're using containers. And then I just wanted to wrap up this topic by talking about sub-irrigated containers. Some people call these self-watering as well. And so a sub-irrigated container is a pretty cool idea. It basically allows you to hardly ever have to water. I've used these in an area where I had a project where I was never going to be on site all season long. It was a public project. We had volunteers who were there weekly to fill up the tanks, and people could pick the fruits. It was tomatoes and peppers and some other things. And so it was a you-pick free area, and I was never there. And so we planted a lot of sub-irrigated planters. So the idea behind these is essentially this diagram. This is a cross-section, and this could be any shape or size container. I've seen them up to 4 by 8 foot beds. And you could probably get even bigger than that if you had the right equipment. It would probably just take more resources to build it and a little bit more finances. So the idea here is that you have a reservoir at the bottom, and there's a way to fill it. So there is a fill tube, which is on the left-hand side, and you basically pour water into the fill tube to fill the water reservoir. And then what separates the reservoir from the top is some sort of how do I describe this? It's a barrier that is strong enough to hold up your top layer, and it has holes enough that it will drain any excess water if needed. And then you have typically some kind of wicking action, and in this case there's like a netting pot essentially that basically will gather the water from the reservoir, and that is usually filled with the same potting mix as above. So it basically has holes in it, whatever this wicking basket is, and we can talk about some different materials in just a moment, and basically gathers water from the reservoir and sends it up into that mix above. And again, this works similar to overturning those bottles into your potting mix, the wine bottles that we talked about earlier. There is a pressure equalization that happens here. And so what happens is that as the potting mix dries out, more water is drawn up through this wicking process, this capillary process. And so a couple of key things to note is that you should have an overflow drain. If you don't have an overflow drain, what can happen is that you start to fill the tube, fill the reservoir, and your potting mix is really dry, let's say, and your water level just keeps growing and growing and growing, and the water can't flow into that potting mix fast enough. And so what happens is that the whole thing starts to float upward, and potentially the separation between the potting mix and what's below collapses, and you get this whole big slushy mess, and it's a no-go. So you want to have, on the right here, they have this little overflow drain outlet at the top of the reservoir, and you leave a little airspace there. So basically your reservoir is going to fill up until that level. When you see water coming out, you know you have filled the tank, so to speak. And then
2 5-gallon buckets, a drill, a yogurt container. That is the entire materials list. This is the system Stacey used in public community gardens where no one was on site daily,
so to speak. And then generally that structural piece, I'll show you a couple of different options in a moment. The reason for the potting mix above instead of soil, again, you want it to be lightweight. Otherwise, this pressure equalization doesn't happen so well, and also the structure can be compromised, and you can end up with a big slushy mess on your hands. The wicking action just doesn't happen as well with soil because it compacts too easily and really settles to the bottom. So you really want something lightweight in here. All right, so that's the general idea on how to do this. And again, when you're building this, you want to make sure that your potting mix that you add, you want to make sure it's hydrophilic, right? That it's basically moist before you add the water. And the reason for that is that if you were to add water and the potting mix was totally dry, basically it will take forever for that wicking action to happen, and you may potentially over-soak the whole thing, especially if that drain tube isn't there. You'll keep adding water and adding water and adding water, and all of a sudden the whole thing will just collapse, essentially. So you want to make sure that that potting mix is able to accept that water, which means that it's already moist. It's like a sponge. A dry sponge, right, takes a while. Water will run off the top of it before it soaks in. You have to really squeeze the sponge and get the water in there. And then once the water is in there, then it will soak up even more water. So it's similar to that idea with the potting mix and this idea of hydrophilic. So here are some different variations of sub-irrigated containers. And there is, on the right, there is the 2 5-gallon buckets, which are basically nested one inside the other. And the 5-gallon bucket that is on the bottom has because it's the reservoir, essentially, where the water is going to be below that other bucket. That black hole on the side, if you see it on the left-hand side of that bucket, is actually the drain, the overfill drain area. So once it fills up to the appropriate level, then water will drain out there. And you want to make sure, and then, I'll tell you, okay, so let's go through one more thing before I say any more on that. So then the upper bucket, what you want to do with the upper bucket is you want to drill a hole in the bottom of it, large enough for that fill tube to go down through into the lower bucket. You also want to cut holes, which are basically aeration holes. Without aeration holes, you won't get this wicking action because the wicking action relies on pressure equalization, and you can't have water suck up and through if it's not replaced by air. And so you want to make sure that those holes are on the bottom of that bucket. And then you also want to cut out the center of the bucket, and then you can basically cut out a hole that is a little smaller than, let's say, another container, like a plastic yogurt container or something like that, that you can set into that bucket. so it just kind of rests inside so it won't fall through. And that is your wicking bucket, or your wicking, I guess just call it your wick. It's your wicking container. And you want to make sure that that has plenty of holes drilled in it, so that as the potting mix dries out, the wicking action comes through those holes into that potting mix that are in that little bucket, and then that soaks it up and brings it up into the bucket above. And so those holes, I recommend, getting a good drill and really making some clean holes. And I would say at least a 1/4 inch, if not 3/8 inch holes, in order to make sure that water is entering. And I would say, just for the structure of your plastic, I would say offset them. So put them in a little offset pattern and spread them apart far enough so that the whole thing doesn't crack open. And so basically what you do is to fill this thing, you have your lower bucket, and you drill out that, like I mentioned, you drill out that drain hole. So you kind of have to mark down where the upper bucket sits, and you want to make sure that drain hole is above the bottom of your wicking container, because you want to make sure that it can wick. If the level of the water is below your wicking basket, then no water is going to get into your wicking basket. So you want to have a deep enough wicking basket. And so you want to make sure that that drain hole is just below the bottom of that top bucket, so that your reservoir can fill all the way up. And so basically what I would do is I would put the bottom bucket in, I would put the top bucket into the bottom bucket. After all the holes are drilled, I would put that wicking container down in. I would mix my potting mix together with some water to make sure it's moist. If it's appropriate for you to put in a little bit of vermicompost, I would put in just a little bit of vermicompost. And if you're using a potting mix that already has some seaweed compost, that might be good, or some mycorrhizae fungi, and you might want to do a mixture of the potting mixes. And then so basically moisten all those together, fill the bucket. Make sure you fill that wicking basket first before you fill the bucket, so that wick is really working for you. You don't want to compact it down too much. You just want to make sure it's filled, right? I would tap it down just a little bit so that some of the air bubbles are gone out of there, but not compacted, right? Because we want to make sure that there is some airspace for that water to wick up. And then fill the rest of your bucket, and then basically plant your plant. Your fill tube will be in the soil mix before you plant your plant, and then fill the bucket and wait until you get some of that drainage coming up. And then you should be good to go. And if you want to test to see how it's working, you could periodically pull that top bucket out of the lower bucket just to see how tall the reservoir is and what's going on below, and to see if there's any leakage, to make sure your wicking basket hasn't broken down or cracked free. And you'll know if your wicking basket cracks open. What will happen is all the soil will start to cave in a little bit. So you'll know if that happens to you. But so my recommendation is 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch holes. Make sure there is plenty of space between the holes, but make sure there are also plenty of holes. Otherwise, it won't wick. The second way to build this in a bucket is the bucket in the middle. And I don't necessarily recommend this unless you have just these materials handy. It uses one less bucket. It's 1 5-gallon bucket, but it's a little riskier in its construction. It might cave in. But it does work. I have used this kind before. What I do is what you're looking at is the wicking bucket below, which is a plastic container that it has a lot of holes on the sides of it. And you're looking at a netting. It is a screen, basically like a window screen. And below the window screen, what's holding up the window screen is a series of plastic cups, your typical like Dixie cups. And those are chock full of holes, essentially. And so that below that screen is my reservoir. Those cups are merely holding the screen up. And then the tube The fill tube, it punctures through that screen and goes down to the bottom, and then the wicking cup, there's a hole in the screen, and that wicking cup kind of sits down. It doesn't touch the bottom of the 5-gallon bucket. It kind of rests it nestles in between those Dixie cups and floats a little ways above the bottom. And then basically what I do here is that once I fill that wicking bucket in the bottom of that wicking container, then I fill the rest of this with potting mix in my plant, and then I fill it up with the drain tube. This one is tricky if you don't have a drainage tube, because what can happen is you can overfill this reservoir. The screen will start to float upward, and you may even get a collapse, because then the screen is now no longer sitting on those plastic cups, and then what happens is that everything starts to disintegrate. And in this case, really important to have potting mix because you really want it lightweight. So it can work. It's a little trickier than the 2 5-gallon buckets on the right-hand side. The upper left, I feel like this is a very tricky scenario, and I would recommend only doing this if you know what you're doing. In this case, what they're doing is they have these corrugated tubes that are in the bottom of a plastic container, and those corrugated tubes also have holes in them, and basically those are the wicks, essentially. So they have, in this case, they have a plastic water bottle that is embedded into one of those corrugated tubes, and they'll probably do that to both of the other tubes. And then they just lay all their potting mix around these tubes, and these tubes will then slowly feed water into the potting mix around. For me, this one feels the trickiest, but it is a possibility if you know what you're doing. And let's see, one last thing about these sub-irrigated containers, common pitfalls. Like I said, the screen can float on that version on the right. The screen can collapse, so we talked about that. The wicking action is ineffectual, which usually means that whatever container you're using for the wick may not have enough holes in it. So that's a possibility as a pitfall. So if your plants look like they're not getting enough water and your potting mix is drying out a lot, then your wick is probably not working. If you have filled your reservoir, if your reservoir is not filled, then you can't expect your wick to be filled. So what you want to make sure, like I said again, that wick is ineffectual if it's not deep enough to be reaching where the water is. And so you want to make sure that your wick is deep enough and has enough holes. And then the other pitfall that I talked about is that your potting mix is hydrophobic. It started out too dry, and it doesn't want to take on water because it's not that spongy material yet. So those are all very important things.
Spindly plants? Check the light and reduce nitrogen. Yellowing from the bottom? Check drainage before watering more. Wilting? Stop and diagnose. Is it dry or is it waterlogged? Burning leaf edges? Flush the salts out and stop over-fertilizing. Purple stunted plants? Fish emulsion for phosphorus or move to a warmer spot. You are not the gardener who waters a wilting plant without checking drainage first anymore. You are the one who diagnoses, who checks the potting mix 6 inches down, who reads the leaf color, who flushes the salts when the edges burn. If you want to keep learning from Stacey Murphy, there is a whole community of gardeners growing extraordinary food, completely free, at growyourownvegetables.org.
This Q&A was recorded at a past Grow Your Own Vegetables event, and what Stacey just shared with you took her years of growing, failing, and figuring out to discover. Now imagine sitting down with 15 experts exactly like her. 15 of the most respected gardeners, herbalists, and soil scientists on the planet, each sharing the single most powerful lesson they know, the insight that changed everything about how they grow food, the thing they wish someone had told them at the beginning. Clinical herbalists who can turn your garden into a medicine cabinet, soil scientists who will change how you see every handful of dirt, food growers who have fed entire communities from a backyard. All of it waiting for you right now, completely free at the Superfood Garden Summit. Go to growyourownvegetables.org/summit, register in 30 seconds, and start watching immediately.